This is Greg Pass with the Americans in Wartime Museum. Today's date is May the 17th, 2019, and I'm conducting an interview with Dave Meister, and we are in Virginia Beach at the Warbirds Over the Beach Air Show. Dave, give us your full name and where you were born.
Dave Meister, born in Hoboken, New Jersey.
And what wars did you participate in?
The Vietnam War, the evacuation of Saigon specifically, and also Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield in the 1990s, the liberation of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. And then as a civilian, that was military, uniform military, and then as a civilian contractor in Afghanistan.
And do you have any other military family members?
I have two uncles. One was Army Signal Corps. Both were actually Army Signal Corps. They were captains, and as it turned out, when I got commissioned, I went Army Signal Corps as well. So those three, and my grandfather, Philip LeBoux, fought in the Great War. He was an infantryman as a new immigrant arriving in the country from Sicily through Ellis Island, got drafted shortly thereafter and fought in France in some pretty big battles like the Meuse-Argonne Forest and St. Mihiel. So he was a soldier.
Very nice. So you have it in your blood.
You bet.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
So why did you enter into military service?
Well, it started right out of high school. I actually dropped out of high school and joined the Navy because it sounded like something fun to do and exciting. But then as I stuck around, it kind of gets in your blood, and decided to make a career out of it. So I served 4 years in the Navy as a catapult crewman on the USS Midway and USS Coral Sea. That's where I was involved with the evacuation of Saigon at the end of the Vietnam War. Then I had a break in service, came back in the Army to the Army Intelligence School in 1983. And while I was in that school, went through the 42-week electronics course, got selected for Army OCS, and then got commissioned as a second lieutenant, and went Army Signal Corps, becoming the third in my family to be an Army Signal Corps officer. And did that for another total of 22 and a half years Army, so 26 and a half years total service. Got out and worked as a civilian contractor for Northrop Grumman and later a company called Academy. And there managed some contracts in the Helmand province of Afghanistan, and made trips to the Helmand province and different parts of Afghanistan, mainly supporting the U.S. military, guarding Marine bases and other forward deployed Army and Marine bases so that they can go outside the wire and do their job.
All right, let's walk back to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an Army guy, know absolutely nothing about the Navy. So
yeah.
What was your day-to-day duties as an enlisted aboard a ship, and what role did your ship play in the Vietnam War?
Yeah, so caught the end of the war again. I was a catapult crewman, which meant we launched airplanes off aircraft carriers. And that day-to-day entailed getting up about 2 hours before the launch schedule, checking out the catapults, making sure they were ready to operate. Then we would have a launch cycle every hour and a half. We'd launch about 20, 25 airplanes and then recover the ones from the previous launch, and did that cycle all day, normally on a 12-hour on a training day. For Vietnam, we actually became kind of a helicopter LPH, if you will, a helicopter ship. We flew our air wing off, and the idea was as helicopters would fly out from Saigon with refugees, they would land on our ship, and we would take the refugees down below decks, feed them, house them. We took over 2,000 refugees on and brought them to the Philippines and Guam for safekeeping, including some boat people we picked up on the way. So since we weren't launching planes, our job as catapult crew was to just help out on the flight deck any way we could. The job I was doing was, as a helicopter landed, I would run up to the helicopter, hold my arms out, and they would load weapons in my arms like cordwood, and rifles mainly, and some pistols, and I'd dump them over by our island structure. We had a big cache of weapons. So that's what I did during the actual evacuation itself. And then when we were done with that, we were back to normal catapult crew duty, launching airplanes.
When did you get over there?
My first deployment with the Navy, I joined in July of '73. So January of '74, I joined the USS Midway, home ported in Yokosuka, Japan. Then we did normal, what they called Western Pacific or Westpac cruises, Philippines, Hong Kong, Singapore, Pakistan. And then come April of '75, we were in Subic Bay, Philippines for about 10 days of R&R, Liberty, if you will. Came back that morning for our morning muster, and they said we're weighing anchor and going to Saigon to evacuate. So we had our catapults completely torn up, for the yard workers to do some pretty heavy maintenance on them. While we were en route to Saigon, the catapult crew had to put them back together. So we were up for probably 48 hours straight in rolling, pitching seas, putting our catapults back together. And then we arrived to Saigon, sat off the coast for, seemed like about 40 days. Watched them bomb Tan Son Nhut Airport while we sat off the coast, and that was the signal things were really starting. And then the evacuees started coming out at the end of April. Remember the exact dates, but those are in the history books for sure.
So, what was the atmosphere like aboard the ship while this history is unfolding in front of you?
Yeah, I mean, it was for catapult crew anyway. It was really busy because again, we had our catapults torn up, which meant we couldn't launch airplanes, and we had to fly our existing air wing off the ship so we could become a helicopter carrier for the refugees and a place for the refugees to land. So, so we were really busy for about 2 or 3 days. Got everything up and running, launched our air wing off. Then it became a few weeks of boredom because we were sitting off the coast waiting to get the order to do something, for the evacuation to begin. And at times you'd walk up on the deck and look out and you'd see nothing but ocean, and at times you'd see you were pretty close to land mass. So we were doing kind of some kind of circular pattern off the coast of Saigon. And then one day it just started and the helicopters started coming out. Slowly at first, and we had a pretty good plan, which quickly went to hell. There were yellow shirts, which are the ones who land the helicopters, and there were spots marked off on the flight deck where the idea was a helicopter would be guided in, it would land. A couple of guys like me would run up to the helicopter, collect the weapons, collect the refugees, guide them down to the hangar bay, where we would feed them and let them rest. But what happened was, as the evacuation went on, helicopters were stacking up behind the deck, running low on fuel. So they couldn't wait for a place to land. They had to make a decision to either try to find their own spot to land or to ditch in the water. And they would try to find their own spot to land in most cases. They'd side slip in, find a spot. There was some of that going on. We had to push several helicopters off the fantail to make room for the helicopters that we weren't expecting to get, because we had no idea what we were getting. There were other carriers doing the same thing we were, but from my perspective, we weren't in contact with them. I mean, all we knew is we'd see them coming in from behind the ship, and when they landed, run up and take care of them.
So how old were you at the time?
I was 19 for the evacuation. I joined when I was 18. I actually joined 17 on the delayed entry program. Went to basic training when I had just turned 18, and I was 19 when the evacuation started.
So you're a young kid at this point.
Yeah, it was just all excitement.
This enormous event.
Yeah. It was fun. I mean, seriously, it felt really good to be doing something where you felt like you were helping people. I mean, I grew up watching the news. I have a brother who's 4 years older. I grew up concerned he'd be in the jungles of Vietnam. So, I saw that every night on the news, and we'd see the casualty rates and all that. So when I went in the Navy and was involved with this, I do remember thinking even then that it's nice to be in an operation where we're getting people out of danger and saving lives. So it was that, but mostly just a big adventure at 19. Yeah.
So tell us what living aboard a ship is like. I mean, are you hot bunking or whatever they call it?
Yeah.
What's that like? What are the living conditions?
Yeah, we didn't have to hot bunk it on the carriers. We had enough room, but it was about 100 beds stacked 3 high within they were close enough to where if you were in the top bunk, you could grab the 2 to lift yourself up. And about 100 people in the room. That was for the catapult and arresting gear people. And we were right under the flight deck. So when we had 24-hour operations, there would be planes landing on your ceiling basically while you're trying to get a little shut-eye. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty cramped. And another big problem was water. It's an old ship. The Midway was CVA 41, was built in the 40s, and it was an older ship for the fleet at the time. So we would have to go on water hours a lot to make fresh water, which meant they'd shut everything down, no showers. And when you work in catapult crew, you had a 14-hour day minimum. You had your 12-hour launch cycle a couple hours before, and some nights you had post-operations maintenance of the catapult. So it was a 14 to 16-hour day. And a lot of times, by the time we got off work, we were on water hours, and the water was shut down, so you couldn't shower. That was annoying. Other than that, I mean, again, you're 18, you're away from home the first time, you don't mind hanging out with your buddies, you just kind of it's just the way things are. It's normal life after high school at that point because you don't know any better. But we had 3 mess halls and no shortage of food. And
Food good?
food was, for me, fine, but I've always been kind of a cheeseburger guy, so not a big deal. But the food seemed fine, and steak and lobster the nights before we came in off a long cruise. And again, when you're 18, I guess the college experience would have been a little different, but for me, this was what I knew, and I enjoyed it. It was a young man. The catapult and flight deck crew was a young man's business. Otherwise, I probably would have been doing it longer because I actually enjoyed working on a flight deck. I told the recruiter when I went to see him, I had to go register. The draft had just ended, but I had to go register for the draft. So I went in to register, and I saw the recruiter, and I started talking to him, and joined the Navy that day on delayed entry. And when it got to the point of what do you want to do, I said, well, I know what I don't want to do. I don't want to be down below decks in an engine room somewhere. I want to be somewhere where I could be outside, I could see the ocean, and I want to be on a ship so I can travel. And he said, boy, we got the job for you. And then the next thing you know, I was a catapult crewman.
So how did you communicate with your family?
Regular mail. Yeah, I mean, there was no, in the 70s especially, there was no email like the ships have today. So it was all by regular snail mail, I guess you call it. Yep.
Your homecoming. Did you I've talked to a lot of Vietnam vets. Everyone has a different story.
Yeah, we're flying.
So, did you have any negative experiences when you came home from the war?
Not really. I remember before I went, my best friends in high school were trying to talk me out of going. They're like, you don't want, because again, Vietnam was, winding down from the hot and heavy side of the battle side of things, but it was still going, and that's the memories we grew up with. And they didn't want me in that situation. So I remember sitting on the basketball court after doing our regular evening basketball games and drinking a bottle of water with my high school buddies. Anyway, and them trying to talk me out of joining. And I told them, I already joined. I'm on delayed entry program. I leave in July. And don't regret a minute of it. So, but after it, coming back, no. As a matter of fact, I didn't have any, people spitting on you kind of thing. Nothing negative like that. Matter of fact, I had a very good experience when I came back from Desert Storm. By then I was Army, and
Let's hold that thought.
Okay, all right. So anyway, I didn't have any bad experiences like a lot of the veterans did coming back from Vietnam, and I think it's because it had wound down so much by the time I joined.
So let's fast forward to 1990-91, Desert Shield and Desert Storm.
Yep.
What unit are you with at this point? What rank are you and what was your role during the conflict?
Yeah, so by this time I went back in the Army in '83, had to go back through basic training again because I'd been out for too long. As an enlisted guy, I went to the Army Intel School in Fort Devens, Massachusetts. It was about a year-long school. And while I was there, I got selected for Officer Candidate School. So I finished my 42-week electronics course, went down to OCS, got commissioned as a second lieutenant. My first assignment was with the 67 Signal Battalion in Augusta, Georgia. And then when Operation Desert Storm, as it would be later called, came along, when Saudi Arabia was invaded by Iraq, we became attached to 11 Signal Brigade out of Fort Huachuca. So by then I was commissioned officer. I was a second lieutenant, pretty close to making first lieutenant. I deployed with my unit in the advance party, meaning I went out to Fort Huachuca to join the bigger brigade with a handful of us from the 67 Signal Battalion. I was a battalion maintenance officer at the time. So I got with them. We flew out to Saudi Arabia, and we sat there waiting for our unit to deploy and for our equipment to come into the ports. So we're getting these roll-on, roll-off ships full of our Signal Battalion equipment, and myself and 4 or 5 other staff officers, we were taking our equipment off the boats and putting it in a section so that when our troops arrived by air, we could match them up with our equipment and they could drive out to our locations in Saudi Arabia.
When did you arrive?
So,
about?
That would have been, it was right around Halloween of, I guess it was 90.
Yeah.
It was 90 because the actual war kicked off in January '91, if I got my date right.
Correct.
So it would have been October of '90 that I deployed with 11th Signal Brigade. Then once I got in country, they offered me the company command of Charlie Company, so I became the Charlie Company commander of a signal company and wound up setting equipment up. I had people in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and scattered about the country, and we were the main communications backbone, if you will, for Third Army at the time.
So what's the day in the life of a signal company? During
during wartime, it's again like everything else. It's kind of hectic at first. You got to get your orders. You got to get your equipment. You got to clean up your equipment that just been sitting on a ship and rusting away. You got to get it all operational. Then you get your deployment orders. And as a signal battalion, we were spread out all over Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. And once you got to your location, you had to get everything up and running. And then once it was up and running, it was back to a lot of tedium and boredom because you were just making sure your communications equipment was working. Our main customer was like 13th MI, Military Intelligence Brigade, so all the intel coming in to them that they could disseminate or analyze and then disseminate was all coming in through us. So we had to make sure everything was 100% working. So there's a little stress in that. If something went down, it couldn't be down. A piece of equipment went down, it couldn't be down for long. A lot of pressure to keep it going. But then after that, it was, you settle into a routine and you wait. Now, when the war actually kicked off, the ground war and the air war first and then the ground war, there were a lot of people. I went as the company commander around to all of our communications vans and just checked in on people to see how they were doing. Because by then, the message, when we went over there, the word we had was 100,000, and this was on the news, 100,000 body bags going. You're facing an Iraqi army that had been in a war for 10 years, hardened veterans and all that. Well, fortunately, it turned out we made pretty quick work of them, but we didn't know that at the time. So when the war kicked off and I went around visiting all my soldiers, some of them were just focused and steady, but there were quite a few very nervous and stressed people. But they all did their job.
So where were you guys? Where were you at this point?
Well, we started off in Dhahran. That's where our equipment came in, and then we split up. We were in King Khalid Military City, and then a place called Eskan Village in Saudi Arabia, which is where my main hub was. And let's see, King Khalid Military City, Saudi, Dhahran. We had that was the triangle we had, and then we had some smaller units scattered out supporting other smaller units throughout the theater. So, and I would travel to all the different sites to check on my systems and my people.
So when the ground war kicked off, did you guys stay static where you were for
Yes.
support operations?
Yeah, we did. By the time the ground war kicked off, we were pretty much positioned, and our signal, and all of our, not just my company, but the other Alpha Company and Bravo Company in our battalion, we were pretty much staying put where we were. We had our missions by then, and we knew who we were supporting.
Yeah. So as you hinted at, we thought it was going to be a slugfest. Turns out not to be the case. Thank God.
Yeah.
When the war ended as fast as it did, remember what you were thinking? What was going through your head on?
Well,
you got the word that the war was over.
Yeah, I mean, one, it was great because nobody expected it to go that quickly and for us to dominate as we did. I mean, I guess some people did, but the average Joe, I don't think, did. But ironically enough, that's when kind of the personnel issues started to happen, because when we were getting ready for the war and during the war, everybody was focused, everybody knew their mission, everybody wanted to do their job. Once it ended, a lot of soldiers thought, because there's a lot of young kids too, hey, war's over, why aren't we on the next plane home? Well, we're the signal battalion, which means nobody can talk or communicate unless we're there. So guess what? We're turning off the lights. We're going to be the last ones to go home. So we sat probably another 6-7 months just keeping the communications up while everybody else deployed home. So we did kind of turn off the lights and be the last ones out of there. And then when you got home, we had a nice reception at home. We marched in the Augusta parade and very welcoming. And then the equipment arrived a couple of months later, and then it was back to, getting these rusty vans that have been sitting on piers and at sea for 2 or 3 months back in shape for the next war when it comes.
Were you married at the time?
Yes, I was not in my Navy days, but I was married for pretty much all of my Army time.
So let's talk about difference in communication. communicate differently from Vietnam to?
Yeah, actually we did, because I mean, Vietnam, I wasn't married, so it was just letters home to my mom and my brother and family and friends. But come Desert Storm, since we were a communications battalion,
You got some perks.
I got some perks, and a couple of perks. One was I was able to call home. Now, I wasn't going to abuse that, because you still, you don't want to, you want to live by the same rules your soldiers have to live by. But my wife was in charge of what's called the family support group. So when soldiers are deployed, their spouse is left behind, have a lot of issues, and a lot of them are very young, right out of high school, and they don't know how to deal with some of the things that we might consider pretty basic. So they go to the family support group for guidance and for help, and my wife was up to her eyeballs in that. So I would call her at least twice a week, strictly for family support issues. Of course, we talk about the kids in between, but it was a real tough job she had. I was happier being in Saudi Arabia than I would have had to deal with that. But she did a great job with that, and the family support group, it's critical. And today, I'm sure it's no different for the soldiers today. With all the deployments they do, it's probably even more intense. But one night, for example, we had one of the Scud missiles. They got lucky. They they launched a Scud missile. Our Patriot battery hit the missile. So the warhead was knocked off. It fell to the ground and fell smack dab on one of our sites, our Bravo Company sites. National Guard was there, and there were 22 or so of them killed and about 60 injured. We had some casualties, but that was a night where my wife was on the phones with me. Hey, we heard what happened on the news. Is it anywhere near you guys? And once we told her, yeah, it hit Matt Cullen's company, Bravo Company, then, we had to keep giving them the details to let them know everybody's okay. Fortunately, we didn't lose any soldiers. We had a couple of Purple Hearts come out of it, but it was superficial wounds. But there was an example.
So
of
how close was that to where you were?
Well, I had the one site was our soldiers were there, but it was Bravo. I was Charlie Company, so Bravo Company owned that site. I had a signal van with 3 of my soldiers supporting them, because we were spread out all over the place. So it wasn't unusual to have one van here, one van there. But for that, I was all the way on the other side of the country, because my main base was in Riyadh area, Escon Village, and that was a probably three-hour drive or so, and through the desert to get to that site. But our Bravo Company that's where they lived, and it was Matt Cullen's company, and Matt was pulling bodies out of the rubble with the rest of his soldiers. So I had one soldier that had her cornea cut. She heard the explosion. She ran to the window to see what was going on, and the window exploded in her face from some ammunition going off. So, cut her cornea. But other than that, we didn't have any. I didn't have any casualties, and Matt didn't have any serious casualties either. Not so for the National Guard, or actually they were Reserve.
Pennsylvania or something.
Pennsylvania Reserve. They were truck drivers, convoys, and that kind of thing, or maintenance unit, one of the two, I forget which. But yeah, they had 22 killed and I think a total of 60 casualties, so another 40 some wounded. Yeah, it was a rough day for them.
Yeah. So Desert Storm ends, you get back home, and then what year did you retire?
I retired in January 2005. So after Desert Storm was over in the 90s, I did a bunch of typical signal assignments. I was with the OP4 out in the Mojave Desert. I was with an MP battalion in Germany mainly as the signals officer, because they all needed a signals officer. And then as my career wound down, my last 5 years, I went to Army Acquisition Corps, did program management. So I was working in the National Reconnaissance Office and the intelligence part of the Army, building intelligence systems, which was a whole lot it was a different kind of fun. And it was a great jump off to a civilian career, because I went right into defense contracting from there. Worked for Northrop Grumman for a number of years. I'm still actually an on-call employee with them. And I also spent 4 years working for a company called Academy, formerly under Constellus Group, formerly Blackwater, providing security in Afghanistan.
So tell us about that.
Yeah, so the company itself, we provided support in Afghanistan and in Israel, mainly armed security guards, mobile and static, so that Department of Defense could do their jobs. So for the embassies, we took care of all the embassies, getting their people from point A to point B with armed security guards and mobile security. And then for places like the Helmand Province, which was one of the contracts that I managed, We had 230 guards that did static security, so they manned the towers and the access points and kept the base secure so that the Marines or Army units that they would alternate coming in and out of that base, they could go outside of the camps in Afghanistan and do their job of hunting down bad guys or whatever their mission was. But when they came in the base at night, they had security. They can go to sleep and eat dinner, take a shower, and go to sleep because, they had us guarding them. So
mostly former military guys.
Yeah, a lot of the guys they hire are either former DoD with infantry or combat experience, or and police, law enforcement. Yeah, guys that know how to handle a gun and provide security.
So, did you enjoy that type of work?
I did. It was good. It was good work. I really enjoyed working with the people there, and it was a good mission. It was kind of nice to be back, doing something. Having retired from the military, back to be forward with the troops again. I did enjoy that. I really did like the trips to Afghanistan. My family didn't like it so much, especially I was closing in on 60 when I was doing it. But I enjoyed that part of it. And so now today, one of the things I do in addition to working here is I just joined the Coast Guard Auxiliary so I can support Homeland Defense a little bit. So once it gets in your, like you said earlier, it does kind of get in your blood. And, now I'm doing it as a volunteer, not because I have to, but, you don't want to give it up.
Yeah. So, let's say you got some kid straight out of high school and he knows that you've been in the military,
yeah.
You've been there, done it, and he says, hey man, I'm thinking about joining the Navy or the Army. What kind of advice would you give him?
Well, I mean, it's not for everybody, but it was for me. I think you'd have to look yourself in the mirror and think about what you want to do with your life. If you are a patriot and want to protect this country and believe in our Constitution and want to defend our Constitution and are willing to do whatever the nation asks you to do that, then it's probably the right place for you. And I personally think everybody should have a couple of years of service. You learn a lot while you're doing it. You learn how to be a real team player if you didn't already know that before, which most people don't at a young age. You learn how to work as a team. You learn how to depend on others and how to, respond when others depend on you. And it is, again, at the end of the day, you look yourself in the mirror and say, I did something for more than just me today.
So we're going to get you a copy of this DVD.
Great.
And you can send a copy to the Library of Congress. We'll show you how to do that.
Okay.
So theoretically, a couple hundred years from now, your great-great-great-great-great-grandkids might stumble upon this video. What would you want them to know about your service to your country?
That I would do it all over again in a heartbeat, and I would be proud of them if they did the same. And it is a needed, necessary part of our society. The military may not be for everyone, but we would be in a very ugly place without it. And our troops are just, they're great. And you look back through history, and I got to tell you real quick, so a few years ago, I have 3 daughters, and they gave me an American flag kind of waving in the breeze medal to hang on my wall, and it has the Pledge of Allegiance because they know my background and they know how much the country means to me. Well, I turned it at 60 plus years old. I turned it into a tattoo because when I look at this in the morning or whenever, it's just a reminder to me that I wanted a permanent reminder of all the Americans before me that have served and the sacrifices that they made, which are towers above any sacrifice I've ever made. And I never want to forget that. And I hope our country never forgets that. My kids won't.
Very good. Well, personally, thank you, and also on behalf of the Americans in Wartime Museum, I thank you for all your years of service and your continued service to our country.
Thank you very much.